Greetings. My name is Joshua Fenstermaker. They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words. But what if a picture could tell an entire story? For some of you, this picture does, but for many, this is either your first time seeing this photo or there's no story to tell behind it. Well, today, I will teach you the story of the Tiananmen Square massacre. Despite it happening just 33 years ago, this June the 4th, the knowledge of these events are not well known. I will begin by telling you the events that led up to this, the events on the day, and the historical retelling and impacts of the event. Now, during this time, the entire world was in the midst of an ideological war. As I said, this was 33 years ago, and just 2 years before that, United States President Ronald Reagan gave a famous speech in which he told Soviet President Gorbachev to tear down that wall. That speech is known by many, remembered by many, but it has a greater significance, that is, signifying the war between democracy and communism. And this war was not fought just between America and the Soviets. It also began to seep its way into Chinese culture. And talks of democracy began to spread amongst Chinese citizens, mostly though through Chinese students. Ming Hua, who was a Chinese student in June of 1989, recounted the events that led to the fateful day in the work Tiananmen Square, Two Ways of Thinking. Chinese students were motivated by change, by patriotism, and by their love for one another. But they were up against a Chinese government that was fearful of what might become of a united people. Now, the crowds began to grow. For weeks, the protesters, led by the students, had been in the streets of Beijing and had even spread to nearly 400 other Chinese cities. Now, all of this leads us to this, June the 4th, 1989, the day this photo was taken. John Pomfret covered the events for the Associated Press and saw as the Chinese government brought armed troops and tanks into the Tiananmen Square. He also recounted that as the night came in, there was a loud message that rang over the speakers in the native Chinese tongue. Later translated, the message said this: "After you have heard this announcement, all of you must leave the area. The martial law force will use whatever methods are necessary to clear the Tiananmen Square." And as John Pomfret recounted, briefly after that, the People's Army began to open fire. Now, while the exact numbers will never be known because of its suppression, it is estimated that at least 10,000 people were killed that day by the People's Army. Killed because they stood in unprecedented defiance to the communist regime. Now, that suppression that we mentioned earlier has not only affected the events retelling within the People's Republic of China, but also throughout the world. Originally in the People's Republic of China, this event was called the June 4th Counter-Revolutionary Rebellion. But after more footage was revealed, they had no choice but to change their stance and began to call it the June 4th incident. Now, according to Yan Zhong, who helped lead demonstrations in the Tiananmen Square, the Chinese Communist Party continues today to suppress free expression, including religion. Modern day, to prevent dissent from minority Muslims known as Uyghurs, China has thrown more than 1 million of them into internment camps. And again, these numbers could be less than accurate because of the suppression. Now, I know that a lot of this is hard to hear. And as a whole, the events that took place in the Chinese capital on June 4th, 1989 are heartbreaking, but it is necessary in many ways to hear. I have told you about the culture and events that led up to June the 4th. I have told you about the day in the Tiananmen Square massacre, and I had lastly told you about the historical retelling and impacts of the protests and massacre. Now, while none of us were there when this photo was taken in 1989, we now know the story behind it. And because of that, it is our responsibility to help tell the story to those who do not know. Thank you.